Welcome to In Their Words, a special mini-series from the Brain Aneurysms and Beyond podcast. These are real stories and real lives, and a reminder of what it means to live with and beyond a brain aneurysm. I'm Rebecca Middleton, a brain aneurysm survivor and the founder of Hereditary Brain Aneurysm Support. In this episode, we hear from Andy, who suffered a subarachnoid haemorrhage in his 20s and discovered he had the familial condition. His story is one of reflection, resilience, and hope. I started by asking Andy to take us back to the moment everything changed.
I guess my story goes right back to when I was 4 years old. I was staying with my nana and granddad with my dad, and he'd woken up with a headache, and he'd gone in to see my nan and asked for a cup of tea. She went downstairs, and when she came back up, she realised that he'd died, and there was obviously a lot of commotion at the time because I was in the same room. But I woke up the next morning and I didn't really have a clue what had happened. And then my mum, who was a district nurse, was kind of integrated into the NHS and did a lot of research at the time with consultants and some of her colleagues. But she got this reassurance that it was rare and there was no reason to think that it would ever happen to me. And then fast forward to when I was 21 years old, I'm really fit, healthy. I'm at college, and I was on a football coaching course. And I'd gone after college to train at a local gym with a good mate. And I'd stood up to do a dumbbell lat raise and sat down with a really excruciating headache, and didn't think much of it, and it subsided after a little bit. So I stood back up and I just hit the deck, and I remember thinking at the time, this is what it feels like to die. And then after about an hour, I'd woken up and I was in this pool of like urine and vomit on the gym floor. And I can remember my friend at the time was trying to get hold of my dad because the gym manager didn't really want to go for help because he thought that I'd been taking something like steroids. And then after about an hour, my dad turned up and realised that it was something pretty severe. So called an ambulance straight away. I jumped in the ambulance and not physically, but I got taken to the ambulance and got rushed into the Royal Lancaster Infirmary, where I was assessed. And talking to the paramedics, they said afterwards that they knew what had happened straight away. So they got me down to Royal Preston Hospital, where there was a specialist neurology unit. I remember that kind of evening and that night being woken up in like every 10 minutes, but was just in this excruciating pain. I've heard it called like a thunderclap headache, and yeah, I've never felt pain like it. I remember going into the consultant room first thing in the morning and met the consultant who said I'd had a subarachnoid haemorrhage. And again, I didn't even really understand what that meant or what it was. And he sent me away for an angiogram, which is when they go in through your femoral artery and dye your blood to work out where the weakness is in your brain. And I come back into the consultant room, and he said that I had about a 40% chance of surviving an operation. So it was quite a tough one to take, signing that medical form. And then obviously went into theatre. They removed part of my skull and clipped the aneurysm. And I woke up in intensive care with some morphine, which I was highly grateful for, and had this kind of stream of family and friends. And then I remember I was really close to my grandma at the time, but after about 3 days, I'd gone to sleep and woke up having dreamt about my grandma. And it was weird because I woke up and I felt absolutely fine. And I was discharged that day. It was, really strange occurrence.
And then what about your recovery? So you're 21, before your hemorrhage, you were very fit, gym, football training, and the lot. What did your recovery journey look like?
I was fit and healthy at the time, and I think that almost carried me through what was a really difficult part of my life. So 21, had a girlfriend at the time, and had a really good social group. And I guess what I would say was that the surgery wasn't the hardest part. It was that following kind of 3 to 6 months afterwards. I'd come out of a big trauma and surgery, and had this massive kind of scar and swelling on my head, and I was incredibly self-conscious at the time about it. I remember going to the hairdressers and almost hiding in shame that I had this big scar on the side of my head because it looked so unsightly. And I'd struggled to come to terms with that disfigurement. I didn't really get any support from the NHS at the time, and I saw a consultant 3 months later who provided like some really simple advice not to do any contact sports or go scuba diving. But his best bit of advice was probably to crack on and just get on with things and live life to my fullest. And I'd gone from sort of being really active, going to college, having 2 different jobs, to absolutely nothing. So lost my identity. My friends, my girlfriend Claire at the time, were coming round often, but I didn't have that consistency in my life anymore. And all my friends were going out socialising. It took me about 4 years to have a drink after the age of 21. And then I really craved and missed exercise and struggled to balance that training that I was doing with recovery. So almost had to kick back. And then I think the hardest thing was that we lived in a really small rural village, and I couldn't drive because the DVLA suspended my license. So I had no freedom or independence. But I had the support of my family and my friends, and that's, again, along with my health, I think those things really pulled me through.
And how important was that? Because if you didn't get the care from the NHS, you didn't get that rehabilitation support, that must have been critical to rebuild you physically and mentally after such a trauma.
Yeah, it was the emotional side that really hit me, I think. And I was a retained firefighter when it happened, and I found a lot of compassion and solace within the fire service. So the occupational health department picked me up pretty quickly after the op, and helped me get back to both being in the fire service, although not going out and shouts, just being around my colleagues. And then it gave me a real sense of drive and motivation to get my fitness back. And although the fire service only checked in on me maybe once a week, that support was invaluable, just to know that someone was on the other end of the phone to ring up. I think I said it at the start, I didn't even have a clue what a subarachnoid hemorrhage was, and I had to do a bit of research on my own. And there were a few friends from college that had talked to me about it. But my girlfriend Claire was patient and supportive at the time, and I relied on her a lot, I think, to get that independence and confidence back. And then my friends helped me get out of the house. We were going off to the Lake District, which is really close by, and we're going out camping. I remember going over to places like Morecambe and Barrow in Furness to friends' houses just to stay over and get a change of scenery. And it was in those moments that I felt normal again. And my dad's family embraced the support that they were offered from the NHS. So all of them went in for MRIs and got screened, and were given the all clear, which I think was really important for the wider family.
So, Andy, you've mentioned subarachnoid hemorrhage a couple of times. Let me just briefly explain. So a brain aneurysm is a bulge or a ballooning in the blood vessel in the brain caused by a weakened area of vessel wall. Now, most aneurysms remain small and cause no symptoms at all, but sometimes they do, and sometimes they can grow, and when they do, they rupture. That's a bleeding on the brain, and that is what a subarachnoid hemorrhage is. And every year in the UK, there are about 5,000 subarachnoid hemorrhages. And if I can come back to you, it must have been really hard knowing that you had the same condition as your father. Is that still a worry for you now?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a daughter who's 8 years old, and as soon as she was born, we went to the GP to get some advice and guidance. And I guess we were given no reassurance or no objective reassurance that she would be okay. And it kind of took me back to the same situation that my mum found herself in 40 years ago, and that the support and the wider support through the NHS just isn't there at the minute. And I guess that's where I found sort of advice and guidance through HBA Support. And Rebecca and we met 18 months ago, and the support that I've been able to get through both yourself and the charity has been invaluable. So you and I have had lots of conversations about MRIs and the fact that I can't get one through my GP, and I found that advice that you've given reassuring. I love the fact that the charity are now providing things like patient guides. The podcast is a way of getting awareness out. The research that I've been involved in and peer support that's offered. I think the support that I've gained through the charity has given me a sense of belonging and purpose. And I've kind of now flipped the dial in that I'm trying to raise money for the charity by doing things like running half marathons and leading walking challenges. So it's been like a full circle for me.
And that's great to hear, and we are very grateful for all your endeavours, whether it's running or hiking. And your point there about that sense of community, that is so important. Again, as a patient myself, when you are diagnosed, you want to find somebody like you. You want to find others, you want to connect, and you want to learn. So we're so grateful for you to share your story so other people can learn from your story too. And your kind of your journey goes on as you try and get a MRI, and obviously look out for your daughter too. But looking back, what's the one piece of advice that you wish you had at the start of your journey, and that one piece of advice that you would give to others who perhaps are starting out on their recovery journey or investigating their family history?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I guess thinking back to when I was 21, going through that process at Royal Preston Hospital with those wonderful consultants and NHS staff, my consultant was right to give me the advice: go and grab life, go and do everything that you can, because life's so precious and short. And I've tried to carry that through. I'm 45 years old now, and I've been fortunate enough to travel the world and jump out of planes and swim with sharks and teach in India and Japan and Australia. So I've had a pretty good go. But I guess going back to your point, Rebecca, it's taken me a long time to find people like me. I remember most of the stories that I'd heard were that people had actually passed away or had lost themselves in that process. And I guess coming back to a network and being signposted to a specialist or charity early on would have really helped me in my journey. I think that the kind of network that I've got now could have made a huge difference to me at the age of 21.
And that's why it's so important that we share our stories and we share the patient guides and we support the research that is out there too, to kind of support ourselves through our different journeys. And we're very grateful for your time and for your thoughts and for your experience today, Andy. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Is there one final piece of advice that you would give to others? Was there anything else that you'd like to share?
I've thought a lot about this, but I guess it's having that voice at the top table. And again, I think that's where your role and the charity's role comes into the fore, because we're a small community and a small network, but without people like yourselves driving the agendas, things aren't going to change. And my story would seem to suggest that there are some significant gaps, both in screening and aftercare support. So it would be just to become part of a community that can make a real difference and change.
Many thanks to Andy for sharing his story with such honesty and insight. And thanks always to our producer, Rob Burney. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And finally, take a look at our website to view more patient guides and resources, hbasupport.org. Thank you, and until next time.